Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about using AI to do more than just have conversations. And so I think a lot of people have become comfortable with using AI in a conversational style. So asking questions, having it summarize text for you, seeking best practices or advice. A lot of people now are realizing that it can do more than that, and that it can be used to build tools, build software, or more living digital artifacts. And so a question I'm getting a lot right now is, firstly, can AI really do this? How easy is it? Do we need a technical team to do this? Do we need a technical person on the team to help us? And I think we're at the point now where the answer is it's pretty easy. You don't need a technical person, and it's very cheap to try it out. And so while I think engineers have been clearly doing this for a long time, we've been using AI to assist software development for several years now, and it suited us. We knew the lingo, we knew how the internals worked under the hood, and I think we're now past that point, and I really think that people outside that technical sphere can use these tools to create pretty useful software. I would push back on the narrative that you can use these tools to replace your entire software stack, and you can go out tomorrow and replace all your SaaS subscriptions and so on. I think that's the wrong place to start. I think where you should focus is, some internal tools, some maybe standalone problems that you have that are maybe quite specific to your team or business or life, and start there. Don't start, trying to replace something that's had years and years of work and brainstorming sessions and thousands of hours of analysis done and security reviews and so on and so on. So, the next major point is that this is a super cheap and quick thing to try. And so I think historically many businesses have known they have tools they could build or processes they could optimize, but realistically they just don't have the budget nor the priority to assign to building that tool or solution. And so they may go out to the software market and they might be quoted some really high fee to develop a solution, and at that point everything gets mothballed and they never take it any further. And so we're now at this point where the code is so cheap to produce, it's so cheap to experiment, that things that were commercially unviable 2 years ago, 1 year ago even, are now viable. And so what I want to do is show you how to get started with this, just at a really basic level. This is not aimed at the software engineering sphere, the people who are really advancing their usage of AI. This is really aimed at the people who are kind of comfortable with the mainstream uses of AI, have heard that AI can be used to build software and tools, and just want to sort of start on that journey. And I think in my own work, where I have clients, and I try to help them adopt AI in their teams and businesses, the most successful sort of story arc for those guys is, okay, I use AI to answer my questions. I use AI to summarize my emails and my comms and maybe generate emails. I use AI to generate more sophisticated documents and reports. Now I'm using AI to build tools and internal sort of applications to increase workflows. So I think that's a really nice path, and I think it works for a lot of small businesses and small teams. Okay, so what are we going to do next? I want to actually show you a couple of examples and some patterns that I see in the different clients I work with that I think are kind of repeatable, and I think everyone could maybe benefit from, and at least give you a starting point for how to think about this journey in your own workplace. So I'm going to show you two of those very different domains, and then I'm going to show you at the end, if you've still got the time and patience, I'm going to actually run through two really fast examples of how you actually do this. For people who are more comfortable with AI tools, they might find this a little bit basic. If you've never done this before, maybe it's worth just watching me go through the process of doing one. And that's it. And then hopefully by the end, you'll feel kind of compelled, or at least curious, to think about the tools or the applications or the calculators that you wish existed currently in your teams and don't yet exist. So pattern number one is around unlocking intellectual property, which I think is something that almost every business of any size could benefit from. And so it's this idea that over the years and decades of the business, it's developed this, absolutely vast treasure trove of experience, of documentation, and maybe there's some sort of discontinued project in there because they have resource constraints or bandwidth constraints, but there was some really good stuff done as part of that sort of sat there not being fully utilized. And so it's really this exercise of go through that, just maybe that's just a quick shortlisting session or a whiteboarding session, come up with the list of things that you could be doing more with, and then try and apply these development tools or these AI coding tools to try and unlock that and turn it into something practical and useful, whether that's an internal tool or something client-facing. I've worked with a guy recently out in the US. I work with a fantastic consultancy in the US called David A. Fields Consulting Group, and they have this vast corpus of intellectual property. So they've been blogging for over a decade. They've published a number of books. They've been on podcasts. They have this huge wealth of material, and they're very much aware that they could do more with what they have. And so David reached out and said, look, I've tried to build this tool a number of times. It's a visual decision-making tool that I think could be really useful for both my team internally, but also we could, provide to clients. And we've had a number of goes at this. It's not number one priority, and therefore it's just never getting done. Could we use this approach to do that? And he sent me like a 10-year-old. He managed to find this 10-year-old PowerPoint, which had some mock-ups of the idea and how it could help make decisions. And then he sent a couple of messages on Slack and a couple of old emails that he'd found. And from that, and with another 5 to 10 minutes of development time using these tools, which we'll go through later, we were able to actually build this tool, right? And so what you're seeing on screen right now, again, not super important what the actual tool is, but just to give you a flavor of what I think is the right size bite to approach here if this is your first time doing something like this. Self-contained tool, easy to use, clearly adds value in the right circumstances, and can be done with sort of 5-10 minutes. So in this case, it helps me make decisions based on sort of one-to-one rankings of choices. So let's imagine you're trying to decide on which of your employees is Employee of the Month, or which software vendor you're going to choose for a large software project. Whatever it is, right? You have a big decision that needs to be made. You have a list of candidates, and you have criteria which you would like to sort of rank those candidates on. And it can be used for personal stuff as well, right? So, for example, I'm about to buy a house rather. So, okay, and I have a number of options. So, Ilkley and Otley. These are all areas in the north of England for those who don't understand this strange language. And criteria are safety. So that's super important. Let's say that's 90. We have a access to green space. So let's say that's 70. And then good high street. So let's say that's sort of less important, right? So they're the sort of weights, safety is the most important criteria for me, green space second to that, and then a good high street third to that. And then what this tool helps you do is you just slide and compare these options against each other for each criteria. So in terms of safety, I happen to know Ilkley is very safe because I've looked this up. Otley is almost as safe, and Horsforth is slightly less safe than Otley. And so all I'm doing here is really comparing an option against another option, which is very easy for humans to do versus a huge list. And then you move through these options, right? So Ilkley's got a lot of green space, maybe Otley's got slightly more, and then I'd say Horsforth is quite a bit less than that. And then high street, I would say Ilkley's probably got the best high street, Horsforth's second best close, and then Otley's a little bit smaller and more village-like. So once I've done all that, I generate the report, and you can see here it just gives me the sort of candidate scorings. And so that was built in 5 to 10 minutes. I think this is a really nice tool. This is obviously a very generic tool, and so we can use this now with clients as well as internal. But just an example of where we went from a couple of minutes of conversation in Slack to a little bit of an old PowerPoint to a working app, right? So super cool. Anyone could give that a go. As long as you want to sit there and sort of work with AI to decide and define exactly what you want, I think you can do this without a technical background. Okay, so we'll move on to the second pattern. Okay, so pattern number 2 is really around this whole area of back of the envelope estimation or calculation. And so it's very common in business and other walks of life to really need a rough answer or come up with a sort of order of magnitude estimate before proceeding and investing more time and resource into that initiative or project. And so another team I work with are in this kind of alternative investment space. And so they investigate kind of exotic or bespoke investment scenarios. And it's important for them really that they can evaluate scenarios quickly. And this particular setup was around power and electrical pricing. And so they'd been offered a promotional or subsidized rate of electricity, and they were trying to work out very quickly whether they could use new battery technology to charge at the subsidized rate in the evening and then provide back to the power grid and the residential power grid later on, and whether the price difference there would actually allow them to be profitable. And so, this is typically the sort of situation where you might use a spreadsheet, and they wanted something a little bit more collaborative that they could sort of get around and talk through. And so they'd originally just tried this in ChatGPT, right? So they had like their AI up on the screen and they were sort of chatting with the tool. And if you've used AI for any time at all, you'll realize that AI is terrible at maths and arithmetic. And so they were getting answers which were incorrect, basically. And so I encourage them to try to, rather than go from, AI immediately to answer, can you go from AI to tool to answer? Right, and so it's this idea of introducing this additional step in the middle where you actually have AI create the tool, and then the tool reliably gives you the answer or the estimations. And so that's what we have here. So again, not super important what the tool itself is, but you can see here we made this in sort of 5-10 minutes and had a little bit back and forth, a couple of iterations and so on. But basically, they provided the rough parameters that they needed to factor in, so battery capacity, charging rate, installation cost, etc., the rates and the charging times and so on. And then on the right there, we could give them a sort of payback period and some sort of reporting outcomes. And so actually, sadly, when they plugged all the numbers in, they realized it was not even break even. And so they backed away from the initiative. But the point being is they saved time that they may have spent otherwise, running through this process of estimation and potentially going further and investing more time and money, which they could better spend on other things. So again, tool itself is not super important. It's more around, are they these kind of estimation questions or calculator type tools that you could use internally to improve decision making? And this is much more, approachable to sit around and like move sliders up and down or punch numbers in and get that sort of visual feedback than it is often just to have, a big grid of calculators and so on. I'm not saying you need to drop Excel and drop spreadsheets, but it's just another way of thinking about these problems. And in some cases, is quicker to do as well, unless you're a sort of Excel wizard. Okay, cool. So let's move on to actually building some of these tools and seeing how quick it is to do in some other scenarios. So I want to go through two different tools, and I've intentionally picked one of the tools to be well outside the standard industries associated with AI. And so I think there's been a tendency to assume that AI only really helps those in the sort of knowledge workspace, and that those in the more real world cannot benefit from this. And actually, as I work with more clients, it's clear that that's not true. And so I'm picking a trades business, right, who build real things with physical materials. And the second one is more of a sort of personal productivity tool. So it's to help people who spend a lot of time dithering or spend too long writing draft messages, of which I'm guilty, and really just helps them get to the point more quickly, right? And it's sort of 80% of the value of the message can be had with 20% of the effort. And often I spend too much time finessing the last few pieces of the email or the message. And so that really, it's not a tool again that's important, but it's more, can you improve your own personal habits and your own personal ways of working? Everyone has their own unique strengths and weaknesses, but now we've really reduce the number of middlemen between the person with the issue or the problem and building of the solution. And so it can be a very personal, customized tool now, which is really cool. So let's jump into the first one. And again, haven't really spent too much time on these, and it's really just to show you an example of how quick it can be. So this first one is the trades example. And so I've asked a couple of my friends what would be useful. And in this case, the idea is to create a optimized cuts list for a timber project. So if you imagine you work in the trades, you're a carpenter or a builder, you buy a lot of your materials in lengths, right? And for a DIY project, the amount of wood waste or metal waste is not a major issue because you're only doing that once or twice a year. If you're doing these projects day in and day out, that waste can be a significant source of profit or lost profit. And so this tool basically takes into account the typical length that you buy your material, the cuts that you need for your job, the blade thickness, and then optimizes the cuts that you should make in order to minimize that waste. So the prompt basically just describes what I've said. So there's a bit here which says the most important rule is that you need to be smart about minimizing waste. And it gives just some industry experience and some industry wisdom about what it exactly wants from the tool. So I want you to pick a really tight fit. I don't want any waste. I'd rather have 4 full boards and a tiny bit of scrap versus 5 boards that all have a little bit of waste in. It must have a feature to accommodate the blade thickness or the blade curve. It must be visual, so people in trades are often more visual, right? And it must give me the total waste statistics at the end. It must be quick to use, and it should allow me to switch between metric and imperial. And then right at the end, make the design easy to use on a phone in a dusty workshop, right? So just a little bit more context there for the AI to work with. And so there, I'm going to just copy this out. Just copy the whole thing. And let's do Gemini. I'm using Gemini. You can use Claude, you can use ChatGPT. I'm using the free version intentionally here to show that you don't need to spend a lot of money to try this out. And really what's important is that you turn this canvas on. And the canvas is just another feature of most of the common AI tools that will put all the work off to one side. And so it can work on it in a more iterative fashion. And it doesn't require sitting there and rereading or resending messages that you've already discussed, which you'll see if you use AI in a very conversational style. So turn the canvas on, and then you just pop that message in that we've worked through. And what you see here is on the right, if you're not technical, quite a scary set of outputs. So here you're seeing the code that is underneath the tool. So this is the code that makes the tool work. Again, don't worry around this for now. What's important is that if the tool doesn't behave as you want it to behave, you can obviously speak to the AI, ask it what it has built and the logic it's currently using, and then direct it to behave differently if it's not working how you wish. But the important thing is the tool that we get at the end, right? So you can see here, I'm in metric mode, so I can switch between metric and imperial. And I have the entry parameters that I requested. So I have the board length, the blade curve, the required cuts, and then the efficiency metrics and the visual down the bottom here, right? And so basically doing what we want, we can add obviously other boards here. So if I say I need a couple of 950s and one shorter piece, let's add that in, and it's dynamically recalculating here. And you can see it's sort of put all these things in the right place. Looks sensible first glance. Obviously, the more time you spend on this, the more you'd be able to spot potential errors or inaccuracies. But it looks broadly speaking like what we're doing. We have a 17.8% waste factor, and we need 4 boards from the store. So again, super quick. I'm not intending to say this tool would be perfect fit right out of the box, but the point is someone with more knowledge of the industry, or a carpenter, builder, etc., could spend the time chatting with the AI here to really make this tool do exactly what they need it to do. And then from there, they could maybe share that or publish it to the internet with a little bit more help, and use it in their industry. I use it on their team. So that's number one, super cool. I don't think you see too many examples like this, so I thought that's a nice one. Now let's move on to the next tool, which is the personal productivity tool, right? So this is a really short prompt, and I'm trying to demonstrate here how much you can actually do with like a couple of lines or a few instructions, right? And so this one just says, build a high-stakes writing tool designed to eliminate overthinking. It must feature a countdown timer and a large text area that automatically removes or wipes all the content if the clock counts down to 0. Make it intense, make it focus-oriented, and it should trigger a really obvious alarm when I'm 30 seconds away, because that's when I really need to make sure I'm ready to publish or to copy. Ensure there is a prominent copy button to save my progress before the purge. Okay, so let's just copy that. And a new conversation here, exactly the same as we did before. Turn the canvas on, pop the prompt in, and see what it does. Again, you're going to see all the all the code generated here. Don't worry about that. You can, if you're curious or you're ambitious, you can read through that code and try and have an understanding of where the key logic is and how it's working. But for most intents and purposes, a tool that you can evaluate yourself, you shouldn't need to worry about that too much. Okay, so here you can see I have the tool, and so it gives me the countdown which I need. It has the copy button, and it tells me that if the time hits 0, everything will be deleted. So let me bring this down to 1 minute just for purposes of the thing. Let me start that, and then let me start typing. So you can see I had the 30-second warning there telling me I need to get a move on. Potentially that's a little bit distracting, but we can tweak the tool and ask it to, maybe reduce that a little bit. Can you catch up on Friday at 2 p.m.? And so really that's all I need to actually, that's all I actually need for the tool, right? So that is super distracting for me. I'd probably speak to the AI and ask it to change that. So let's just do that. And you can see the timer now, and it deleted the message. So it broadly does what I want it to do, but that shaking was way too off-putting. So I just said, can you just share the screen for a few seconds and then stop, which I think would be a little bit better. And then what it will do is if you just flick over to the code, you can see what's actually happening under the surface here. It's now editing that code on the canvas. Okay, so it's changing based on the new requirements that you gave it. And so when it's finished, we'll be able to see the new updated version of the app. And you can see on the left here, it's telling you, I've limited the shaking to a 3-second burst. So again, let's go for 1 minute. And let me start that. So hopefully this time. So I got the shake, and it should stop after 3 seconds. Yeah, there you go. Look, so it's factored in our new requirements. Can you? Okay, so that is enough. Now, what I often do is I have their email finished, and then I start going, it's not, and I start to give it all this extra detail, and it's not necessary. So this would encourage me to just think, like, the text is ready, I can send that, that's good enough, and let's move on with something more important. So again, a kind of a toy example, but it gives you an idea of what you can do very quickly for like a personal weakness or maybe a personal strength that you want to emphasize or leverage more. So that's it. That's 2 examples. I really encourage people to just try stuff out. The best way here is not to watch tons of tutorials about this, but it's just to open the tool and play around with it. If you come up with something really cool, then share it and leave a comment and maybe a link to the application if you've managed to publish it somewhere. If you want help writing the prompt as well, there's tons of resources online for that. You can also just ask AI to tell you how to improve the prompt, right? So say to AI, I want an app that does this. Can you ask me some questions that help us build the requirements? And that's a really good technique as well. And just generally just be experimental. Don't be too afraid of this stuff. Start with something self-contained intentionally so that you're not worried about exposing, sensitive information or incorporating your team's information or documents and so on. Pick something self-contained that you can just describe in a few words, iterate on it, and hopefully use it to do something cool and productive within your business. Okay, thanks guys.